Greetings and salutations, one and all. Welcome to the night shift. It is Tuesday night, another healthy love night right here on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. How you doing? I want to say big ups to each and everyone locked in right now. Those locked in on TuneIn Radio, the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. Across the pond, One Harmony Radio. Top of the morning to you guys over there in the UK. Big up King Genius, big up Queen Genius. Want to say big ups to those tuned in on WGLRO, the People Station. Boy, it's starting already. I want to say big ups to those on WGLRO, the People Station, taking you from the sheets to the streets with the Donnie Walker Morning Show. Hailing everybody from Detroit to Denmark and everywhere in between. Big ups to you guys over there on WGLRO and the WGLRO family. The PEMG TV crew, big ups to you. And of course, right here at the home of the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, kevinstew.com. Glad to have you. Couldn't do it without you. You have my word. I wouldn't even try. Kicking it off with a little Shelly Sweet Shells. A track called My Neighbor.
Tell my neighbor come over. He telling me load on music. He telling me that's ain't right. The neighborhood white as ever. No problems to sleep at night. I tell him I love me soca. The music hot like a true love. Bring your body, come on out here. Move your body just like you don't care. We jamming it so sweet. Feel the rhythm, feel the heat. Bring your waist from walk to the soca. All our ways just jam together. I tell him it's so sweet. Feel the rhythm, feel the heat. Bring your waist from walk to the soca. All our we just jam together. I tell him it's so nice. Change your mind and don't think twice. I tell him it's so nice. He moving the whole crowd, singing soca loud and loud. It's my neighbor, no control. He said he just can't do that. He never hear music, so I tell him that's how we do it. Bring up what's on there last night. It's a love effect in all night. Come join and feel the vibes. I tell him just come over, enjoy yourself, no pressure. We jamming it so sweet. Feel the rhythm, feel the heat. Bring your waist, come walk to the soca. All of we just jam together. I tell him it's so nice. Change your mind and don't think twice. I tell him it's so nice. He moving the whole crowd, singing soca loud and loud. It's my neighbor, no control. The music pumping big time, man, woman taking small wine. Oh yeah, we in the street wet, we jamming, enjoying the fat. Something say look in the corner, it's my neighbor, he come over. He hand in the air, he jamming, on a bumper it says moving. He moving the whole crowd, singing soca loud and loud. It's my neighbor, no control. What went on I don't know. He moving the whole crowd, singing soca loud and loud. It's my neighbor, no control. We jamming it so sweet. Feel the rhythm, feel the heat. Bring your waist from walk to the soca. All of we just jam together. I tell them it's so sweet. Feel the rhythm, feel the heat. Bring your waist from walk to the soca. All of we just jam together. Yes, my neighbor. Jamming. We jamming it so sweet.
Want to say
Bring your waist, come walk to the soca. All of we just jam together. We jamming it so sweet.
Want to say thanks to Pulse Media Group for sponsoring this segment of the show.
Just jam together. I tell them it's so nice.
When being in a moment is priceless,
Think twice. I tell them
Pulse Media Group you need to get in touch with.
he moving the whole crowd. Singing soca loud and loud. It's
Pulse Media Group can do everything that you see right here on kevinstew.com. They can create a website for you. If you already have a website, they can host your website for you. If you already have all that in place and you do a little bit of a broadcast, they can hook you up with the broadcasting solutions. If you just want to capture your moment, they have that. They can take care of that too. videos, stills, just give them a call. Pulse Media Group, 754-999-6020, or visit them on pulseemg.com. Tell them you heard about them on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. South Florida Zone, Shelly Sweet Shells, track called My Neighbor. So tonight in Healthy Love, we are looking at isolation and the effects that isolation have on health. And you might think, wait, what? Isolation? Health? What does one have to do with the other? Well, you'd actually be very surprised, as we'll be talking tonight. Numbers to call, numbers to text as the show progresses. 773-789-STEW. That's the number that gets you in touch. You can call, you can text. Like I said before, if you're overseas and you can't call and you can't text, but you can Skype, Kevin.Stew gets you in touch. You can use my handle on Skype, Kevin.Stew, or search using my email, djkevinstew@gmail.com. And you can share your views that way. And this is a judgment-free zone, so you need not worry about the fact that what you're saying might be construed as you know, a little bit different from the norm. That's okay. Your views are respected and encouraged. Like I said, this is a judgment-free zone. So it is encouraged that you chime in and you share. Of course, for those of you anywhere in the world that choose to do so, kevinstew.com, and jump in the stew pot. The stew pot, others call it a chat room. We're fancy over here. We call it the stew pot. It's where we're interactive. That's our interactive portal. And you can remain anonymous, or you can change your name. Either or works. Anyway, still judgment free. So come on in, the water is always fine in the stew pot. It's where we keep things bubbling. Alright, so health effects of social isolation and loneliness. And you hear something like that, and immediately you're thinking, okay, people living by themselves and loneliness killing them. Well, that's the kind of thing that you'd get from stories and songs, pretty much, right? Fairy tales and songs. Well, love songs to be specific. Human beings are social animals, and our biological, psychological, and social systems evolved to thrive in collaborative networks of people. In many societies, social networks are likely to thin as people age, leading in many cases to isolation and loneliness. I guess there's some that would argue that the older you get, the wiser you get, and the smaller your circle gets. But that's up for debate with some. Everybody doesn't feel that way, and of course you're entitled to your own opinions. But as we go through tonight, looking at some of this information here, we look at the evidence that social isolation affects health and mortality, whether or not the isolation is accompanied by subjective loneliness. Some studies suggest that the impact of isolation and loneliness on health and mortality are of the same order of magnitude, such as risk factors as high blood pressure, obesity, and smoking. We also review what is known as the mechanisms underlying the effects of isolation and loneliness on health: cardiovascular, inflammatory, hormonal, sleep related, and emotional factors are all relevant. And we look at the preliminary evidence that interventions to address social isolation and loneliness may actually improve health outcomes. Throughout all the research that will be referenced, there are cautions that it can be difficult to isolate cause and effect in these studies. Some people with pre-existing health conditions may be prone to social isolation, and many chronic health conditions make socialization more challenging. We must also remember that not all who are isolated are lonely, and not all who are lonely are isolated. That right there. Not all who are isolated are lonely, and not all who are lonely are isolated. Being in unhealthy relationships can be more stressful than being alone. Nevertheless, there's a conclusion that efforts to address social isolation in older adults, including those relying on remote technologies, are likely to be cost effective for healthcare systems and are at the very least humane approaches to a very common form of distress in older adults. Generally speaking, we're a social species. Our social networks, families, tribes, communities, etc., enable us to survive and thrive. Our survival was served by the evolutionary development of behaviors and psychological mechanisms, your neural and hormonal and cellular and your genetic systems. All these that support social interactions. But as with all human traits, there is variation in our social. I sorry about that. Through it all, there are variations in our social behaviors and needs. The fact is, most of us are psychologically and biologically programmed, so to speak, to need social networks. It is logical that social isolation may impose stress on our minds and bodies that has a significant impact on health. Since social isolation and loneliness are common in older adults, much attention has been paid to clarifying their adverse effects on health in old age. However, It is surprisingly difficult to study these effects and to distinguish the effects of social isolation and loneliness on health when pre existing health conditions such as immobility and depression can themselves both contribute to ill health as well as increase isolation and loneliness. It is also challenging to distinguish social isolation and loneliness from one another. Not all who are isolated are lonely, and not all who are lonely are alone. And as we go through tonight, we look at what a lot of what is already known as it is related to isolation and loneliness and how these things affect our general health. Not all people experience quote unquote aloneness, and not everybody experiences it in the same way. Social scientists who study isolation and loneliness have attempted to define these terms in very specific ways. Since a person is considered socially isolated if they live alone, have less than monthly contact with friends or family, and don't belong to a group, whether it be a religious congregation, a club, a work, or volunteer organization, any kind of social group you can think of. Now, of course, some choose isolation as a preferred lifestyle. Others, likely far more in number, have isolation imposed on them through possibly the death of loved ones, family and friends moving away, maybe, remote rural housing, recent moves to an unfamiliar city that can create that feeling of loneliness, impaired mobility, and numerous other situations leading to depleted social networks and isolation. People in these situations may be more likely to experience loneliness and to feel isolated, albeit maybe perceived isolation. There are validated research instruments that quantify social isolation and loneliness primarily in terms of number and frequency of social contacts. However, defining isolation in quantitative terms may not always be valid. And research as well as experience tell us the quality of our social interactions more than the number of our relationships determines loneliness. Researchers have also approached these issues using qualitative methods. Cornwell and Waite in 2009 used terms such as social disconnectedness and perceived isolation. And they use these terms to determine social isolation and loneliness using the objective and subjective nature of these states. Social disconnectedness is defined as lack of contact with others. Perceived isolation is defined as the subjective experience of lack of companionship and support. Loneliness may be part of that, although people can still experience subjective isolation around others. The assumption is that social disconnectedness without perceived isolation, that is, without the isolation without loneliness, that would be more ego syntonic and less stressful than states of loneliness and depression, therefore having less of an impact on health. Research has not always supported this assumption, as you can see with Cornell and Waite. Social isolation, with or without loneliness, can have a large impact on mortality, on mortality risk, I should say, as smoking, obesity, sedentary lifestyles, and high blood pressure. Several indications or indicators of social isolation have been associated with poor health. There's vast literature on this topic that is beyond the scope of what we're going to cover tonight. But several studies can help us to better understand the relationships of social networks, perceived isolation, health, and mortality. From a methodological perspective, sometimes the method of saying words is difficult. Yeah. The methodological, you see, you got me again. Perspective. These studies assume that health status contributes to one's ability to be socially engaged. Therefore, health status can contribute to loneliness and isolation, thereby creating a cause and effect dilemma when attempting to define the relationships between loneliness and social isolation, health, and mortality. Investigators must control for baseline health status in the design of their studies and in the analysis of their data. Despite this, the effects of social isolation and loneliness on health are a strong enough force that they consistently emerge as unambiguous risk factors for ill health and mortality in the many studies that have examined these relationships through various methodologies, including longitudinal cohort studies and meta-analyses, these being quantitative analysis of combined results of carefully selected studies. An older but large and well-designed prospective study over 4 years looked at total mortality in a group of men for whom social networks were known. Some 32,624 healthy men were followed, and 511 deaths occurred. Socially isolated men, being not married, fewer than 6 friends or relatives, no memberships in religious or social organizations. These had a 90% increased risk of cardiovascular death and more than double the risk of death from an accident or suicide. They also had double the risk of non-fatal stroke. They had no increased risk from non-fatal MI in this particular study, raising the question of whether or not social isolation contributes to either the severity or survivability of cardiac arrests, or cardiac events, I should say. These investigators did not look at loneliness versus social isolation as relative risk factors. And non-fatal MI, I am going to assume in this case referred to mental illness. It is natural to assume that loneliness has a greater effect on health, and some studies support that particular conclusion. Adverse effects on health from loneliness are seen at every stage of the life cycle. and you can look at Harkley and Capitanio in 2014. But the elderly are at particular risk both for loneliness and the health consequences of loneliness. For example, in a questionnaire study involving a large number of older adults in Finland, 39% suffered loneliness at least some of the time, 5% often or always. Loneliness was statistically associated with several demographic variables, including rural living, older age, living alone or in residential care, widowed, low level of education, and low income. All these play a factor. Subjectively, the people in this study attributed their loneliness to illness, loss of spouse, and lack of friends. Poor health status and poor functional status were also associated with greater feelings of loneliness. A study done by Cassiopo and Cassiopo in 2014 found loneliness to be associated with ill health to a greater degree than just social isolation. They examined two elements of social isolation independently: social disconnectedness and perceived isolation, on both physical and mental health. Stronger relationships were shown between loneliness and worse health, including cardiovascular disease, inflammation, and depression. And this was more than the social isolation itself. Loneliness in older adults was shown to significantly increase risk of functional decline and death in a recent longitudinal cohort study of 1,604 followed individuals, that is, followed over 6 years. Some 43% of the cohorts reported loneliness, and they were at higher risk for both functional decline, your ADLs and mobility, and death. The authors of this study found that loneliness was associated with these poor outcomes even after adjusting for baseline health status and depression, but did not compare those who were isolated to those who were lonely, which could quite possibly have given different outcomes. But again, we wouldn't really know. For those of you just tuning in, welcome to the show. It's Healthy Love right here on the night shift to DJ Kevin Stew. We're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to talk some more. Thanks again to Pulse Media for sponsoring this first segment of the show. When being in the moment is priceless, you want to go ahead and give them a call. 754-999-6020 or visit them at pulseemg.com. See what they can do for you. We'll be right back after these few messages.
Pulse Media Group, innovative streaming and recording, has done it again. A new way to get your business in full view of your neighborhood consumer through AdShare TV. It's available in your neighborhood today. It's easy. Just call us 754-999-6020. Become a host today and place a TV monitor in a strategic location so it's easy to see. Get a 1-minute video ad or longer that plays anywhere in our network. Can't be a host? No problem. For a few dollars, we'll run your 30-second video ad. A host can run announcement specials like buy one get one free or discount ads. Let's turn your flyers into a 30-second video with music or a voiceover, or let us create and run your video ad with a spokesperson. Take advantage of our early enrollment discount. Join us today your ad will be seen at least 30 times per day in your AdShare TV neighborhood. It's easy. Just call us, 754-999-6020. AdShare TV, part of Pulsing Media Group.
Come on, smile. Oh, honey, he's still not smiling.
Maybe he's not a smiler.
Yeah, maybe he's just not a happy baby.
Maybe he's just being a boy.
Or maybe he's teething.
Maybe it's just a phase.
Maybe he has autism, and we can definitely do something to help.
Maybe is all you need to find out more about autism. No big, joyful smiles by 6 months is one early sign. Learn the others at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
The award-winning Palace Peace and Love Academic Scholarship is appealing for your support to help educate one student at a time in Jamaica and the Caribbean.
Palace awarded 492 scholarships and several computers to university and high school students in Jamaica and the Caribbean over the past 7 years, valued at approximately 33 million Jamaican dollars, $250,000 US.
Importantly, our university graduates to date include 15 medical doctors, 10 lawyers, 6 engineers, and 15 fine arts students. Our goal is to award at least 105 scholarships in 2018.
Please partner with us to make this a reality for those well-deserving, hard-working students by making a tax-deductible donation online at www.palace1.org
or send a check to Palace, P.O. Box 5461, Alpharetta, Georgia 30023 USA, or telephone 770-744-2154.
Palace, preserving young minds for posterity.
Matthew 28:19 says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations." With this in mind, and encouragement received during a South Florida media conference, The Church Links was birthed. The Church Links is an interdenominational worship service portal for churches, providing the tools to spread the word through technology in a cost-effective way. The Church Links, www.dahchurchlinx.com. Your links to worship and praise.
Hey yo, this is Caraman to let you know that right about now you are logged on to DJ Kevin Stew on the night shift. Don't move.
I'm singing out loud. I'm singing out loud. With my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground, I'm never letting this moment go. Let the music surround as the world goes around. I have something to do. Can anybody
The sound of Alexis Chapper.
Oh, I'm singing out loud.
Hails out of Texas.
With my head in the clouds and
The track is called Singing Out Loud.
we're letting this moment go. Let the music surround as the world goes around. Come on, come on. Oh, I'm singing out loud.
I want to say thanks to Althea and her Healing Heavenly Hands for sponsoring this segment of the show. Althea is a licensed massage therapist that operates out of Broad County, North Miami-Dade, and South Palm Beach counties. Just give her a call, she'll come to you. Well, once you're in one of these locations.
I'm singing out loud.
954-655-9000.
With my head in the clouds.
You can also email her at theolater@att.net.
Let the music surround as the world goes around.
She comes to you with oils, her table. You just provide the space and the time.
Singing out loud.
You'll get your massage, and then you go about your business.
Singing out loud. Singing out loud.
For those of you who are just tuning in, welcome, welcome, welcome to the show. It's a night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, Healthy Love Night here. And tonight, as those of you watching on kevinstew.com will see, we're looking at unhealthy isolation. For those of you who are just listening in, you're invited to jump on over to kevinstew.com where you can listen and watch. Not much to see but me, ha ha ha. But it also provides the interactive portal of the Stew Pot. Others call it a chat room. We call it the Stew Pot over here because we're quite fancy that way. And remember, this is a judgment-free zone, so feel free to share your opinions. That way, it encourages us to have an acceptance through enlightenment, because we're learning what others are thinking and their views, and why they have those views. That gives us a better understanding of our brothers and sisters, or neighbors and friends. Now, with as we continue to look at isolation, many investigators have found that social isolation itself to be a risk factor for ill health. In a meta-analysis of studies examining the magnitude of effect of social isolation and loneliness on mortality, in which important baseline health variables were controlled in the analysis, Holt, Lundstedt, and colleagues in 2015 found a 29% risk, or 29% increased risk of mortality over time from social isolation, and 26% increase in mortality risk from loneliness. Interestingly, they found a 32% increased risk from just living alone, independent of social isolation, that is. They found no correlation of objective versus subjective social isolation. This finding is counterintuitive, in that we would think that the stress of loneliness would be a driving factor for ill health, yet aloneness seems to be at least as strong, if not a stronger influence on health. Steptoe et al. In 2013 investigated whether the health impact of social isolation was caused by loneliness in 6,500 men and women more than 52 years of age participating in the English longitudinal study of aging. They quantified contact with family, friends, and community organization and administered a loneliness questionnaire. They monitored mortality for an average of 7.25 years per subject. After adjusting for demographic variables, social isolation increased mortality, whereas loneliness did not. Those with the highest social isolation, at least, well, being the least social contact, had an even higher risk. Now, it is very important to note that although there was an increased mortality risk in lonely people, they also had higher baseline mental and physical health problems that may have accounted for the increased risk over the period of observation. That is, loneliness in this study was association with high baseline levels of depression, arthritis, and mobility impairment than the social isolation without loneliness cohort. So, when baseline health variables were factored out, the loneliness cohort did not seem to have as high a mortality rate. In reality, both social isolation and loneliness are associated with increased mortality rates. Now, whether or not the impact of social isolation and perceived isolation, that is loneliness, on health are comparable remains unclear. But the evidence seems to be leaning towards the conclusion that both pose risks to health. In an effort to clarify the relative effect of loneliness and social isolation on cardiovascular mortality risk, Valtorta et al. In 2016 conducted a meta-analysis of 11 cardiac and 8 stroke studies. Poor social relationships in general were associated with a 29% increase in risk of coronary heart disease and a 32% increase in stroke risk. This increased risk is comparable to the risk of obesity and lack of physical activity, and whether isolated people were lonely or did not did not appear to make a difference. Now, pay close attention. This is a lot of information you're getting all at once. But try as best as you can to pay attention to the main themes that are being laid out here as it relates to physical isolation and social perceived isolation. Because as I close out the show, or the information segment of the show, there is another piece of information that ties all this together. And if you've been following the night shift since last week, actually, I've been addressing the issue of incarceration. And that continues tomorrow night when we speak to an individual who is incarcerated, I should say. Yeah, we're going to speak to someone who is incarcerated tomorrow night. And we'll be getting first-hand information as it relates to some of these things that we're looking at tonight. The effect of perceived isolation versus realized isolation. And we've spoken to individuals who have been incarcerated before. And we will speak to more in the coming future, in the near future. But these are things that are sometimes not even considered by those of us who take things like this for granted. Those of us that take being social and the ability to be sociable and not have that perceived sense of isolation. There are people that take that for granted because for whichever reason, they're never lonely or feel alone. Many potential mechanisms have been proposed to account for the relationship between social integration, perceived social support, and health outcomes. First of all, spending time with people who exhibit healthy habits and reinforce healthy behaviors, improve access to health-related information, better nutrition, more physical activity, transportation to healthcare providers, and even increased financial resources. And of course, peer relationships can easily lead to unhealthful behaviors or interpersonal stress as well. But in the literature pertaining to older adults, the health promoting benefits of social relationships seem to outweigh the negative effects. Cornwell and Waite in 2009 says has information relating to this, but changing health behaviors is likely not the only mechanism by which social contacts protect health and well-being. Loneliness is known to be a major risk factor for depression, which itself accelerates functional decline and increases mortality rates. Even subclinical depression may increase risk of all-cause mortality. So depression may have contributed to the increased mortality and cardiovascular diseases found in the loneliness cohorts of these studies. Depression may increase mortality and illness through several mechanisms. Depression can increase platelet aggregation through diminished serotonin function and thereby increase the risk of myocardial infarction and stroke. There may also be increased heart rate variability, which is unstable autonomic nervous systems, and increased risk of adrenaline, both leading to increased risk of cardiac arrhythmia, leading to the increased risk of cardiac arrhythmia, and this is according to Seymour and Benning in 2009. Now, whether the mechanism is the effect of depression on mortality is significant in size, the mechanism, the effect of depression on mortality is significant in size. In a large cohort study, cardiovascular health study that is, investigators found that depression increased mortality risk by 24% when they accounted for all important covariables. Social isolation can have direct effects on cardiovascular disease risk factors. Perceived isolation and loneliness are associated with increased sympathetic nervous system activity, increased inflammation, and decreased sleep, all of which can accelerate brain and cardiovascular aging. You ever notice there are some people that when they don't get enough sleep, you can actually see it on them and they look older than they actually are? Just picking one of these things out of the list. Loneliness increases the risk for dementia. And I am going to go out on a limb here and say that could possibly include perceived loneliness. But loneliness increases the risk for dementia, likely through some of these mechanisms. However, the absence of social interaction itself may also be a primary factor in that social stimulation can help maintain brain health. Grant and colleagues examined key metabolic risk factors for cardiovascular mortality, looking at blood pressure, lipids, and cortisol responses to stress. Using a measure of social integration, they found dysregulated blood pressure and cortisol responses to acute stress in people, and this is 238 middle-aged men and women. So they found responses to acute stress in people with few close friends. They also saw increased cholesterol in the socially isolated men, but not the women. Strange, right? These physiologic changes increased risk of heart attacks and stroke. The authors note that these changes in cardiovascular risk factors in isolated individuals were independent of whether they were exposed or expressed feelings of loneliness. Finally, there is also some evidence that loneliness can affect immune function, increasing susceptibility to infection. Loneliness is also associated with disrupted sleep. Insomnia affects immune function, glucose regulation, cardiovascular risk, dementia risk, mood, and daytime function. Now, we don't know yet whether efforts to reduce isolation and loneliness can actually improve health. Despite this, Valtorta et al. In 2015 note that the evidence linking social isolation in old age with poor health is strong enough that efforts to reduce cardiovascular disease need to consider social interventions aimed at reducing isolation. Now, while this claim may be premature, there are studies that do suggest increasing social networks can improve health. In one such study conducted over a 10-year period of follow-up, men aged 42 to 77 with lower levels of social integration were, as expected, found to be at greater risk of total mortality than those with more social connections. What was surprising in this study was that in a sub-analysis of older men, of the sample who showed increasing social network size over the 10 years of the study, an increased number of close friends or increased attendance at religious services were both associated with reduced risk of death. So the more sociable they were, the more they interacted with other people, the less the chance that they would die. The effect size was robust. Those reporting having more friends over time showed a reduction of 29% in mortality risk per year. This doesn't prove causality. Perhaps improvements in health for other reasons promoted behaviors that led to more friends. Nevertheless, that bit of information is encouraging to say the least. Now, although the stress of being a caregiver to a disabled family member is not the same kind of stress as social isolation, caregivers consistently describe the isolation of the caregiver's role as one of the most stressful aspects of the caregiving role in and of itself. Caregivers consistently report higher levels of stress than non-caregivers, and chronic stress is associated with poorer health outcomes and higher rates of mortality. But caregivers overall have a lower mortality rate. Did you know that? The important factor as it relates to this is stress. Not all caregivers experience significant stress though, and those that don't may experience health benefits from the caregiving relationship. In fact, in one study, non-stressed caregivers had 43% lower rates of mortality relative to non-caregivers. But the key here is being non-stressed. Caregivers overall do have lower mortality rates. In previous studies, caregivers experiencing significant emotional stress showed a 60% increase in mortality rate. These findings are relevant to considerations of interventions for social isolation. Non-stressed caregivers are more likely to experience positive emotions from the person they are providing care for and to gain strength from having a vital role to play in another person's life. To be a caregiver and not feel some reciprocal caring from your partner is a special form of isolation that is particularly demoralizing. It is also stressful and it is unhealthy. Even small efforts to make isolated people feel appreciated and useful may reduce the stress of loneliness and thereby improve health. There are also innovative ways to help depressed, isolated people that may also have positive effects on health. In a 12-month multi-modality home-based intervention, randomized controlled trial for older adults with depression, those receiving a home-based treatment had significantly better responses. The home-based treatment group were more likely to be in remission from depression. They had greater quality of life improvements and greater gains in functional well-being and emotional well-being. Some things that need to be taken into consideration. Now, before we take another break, let me just say this. There have been reviewed studies examining the complex relationships of health, mortality, and social isolation in old age. There is strong evidence that many older adults do feel isolated, and that loneliness is associated with poor health and higher rates of mortality. This is also evidence that there is also evidence that social isolation, even without subjective loneliness, increase risk. The effect of social isolation on health appears to be of a similar magnitude to other risks to health, such as high blood pressure, smoking, and obesity. Whereas these health risk factors have stimulated major public health interventions in recent decades, efforts to reduce isolation and loneliness have not been made on a level of population health. Some authors, however, warn that such large-scale efforts based on health risk may be premature. They say that increased risks to health from isolation and loneliness are actually modest in magnitude, and that the strong associations found in many studies are due to failure to control for baseline health status. We also have to keep in mind that being in toxic relationships may be even more stressful than and unhealthy than loneliness itself. Nevertheless, there is enough evidence to consider social isolation and loneliness among older adults a significant public health issue. There are also compelling hypotheses and some experimental data to explain the physiologic mechanisms by which social isolation drives disease. And perhaps more importantly, we are starting to see evidence that interventions to reduce loneliness may provide health benefits. Now, when it comes to reducing this loneliness, you ever wonder how all that is factored in when someone is incarcerated? How does the perceived loneliness, how does the difference in social interaction in a situation where an individual is incarcerated, how does that factor in? Is it any different from that which we were looking at? Basically, what we were looking at was someone becoming older in age, and the fact that their health, as it depletes or deteriorates naturally, could be affected by their geographical location or their health. Add the other dynamic, that part of them being incarcerated, taken away from the family structure and community structure that they are already familiar with, and put in a new environment with different rules and a different community. Yes, they are around other individuals, but do they feel alone? And does that affect their health?
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends. In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today?
The only thing I didn't learn today.
The only thing I didn't learn
is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov. A message from the Ad Council.
When being in the moment is priceless, consider the ability to share that moment. If you can video it, you can broadcast it. And Pulse E-Media Group has the tools you need. Weddings, birthdays, funerals, graduations, church services, parties, seminars, you name it. Pulse E-Media Group can provide you with a secure medium controlled by you to broadcast your event. Contact us at www.pulseemediagroup.com for more information. Pulse E-Media Group, when being in the moment is priceless. Matthew 28:19 says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations." With this in mind, and encouragement received during a South Florida media conference, The Church Links was birthed. The Church Links is an interdenominational worship service portal for churches, providing the tools to spread the word through technology in a cost-effective way. The Church Links, www.dahchurchlinx.com, your links to worship and praise.
This is Gia Yee, and you're listening to The Night Shift with DJ Kevin Stew.
The show. In the background, the sound of G.I.E. track called No Emoji. I want to say thanks to Reggae Global Entertainment for sponsoring this segment of the show. Reggae Global Entertainment can be your booking agent, your tour management, administrator. They can take care of your music production, your press releases, your copyrights, your publishing, your trademarks, legal contracts, and so much more. Give them a call, 954-998-8034. Let them know you heard about them on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew. No emoji found. The sound of G.I.E. Now, I mentioned before the break the added dynamic of incarceration. And while you've, I hope, never actually experienced it firsthand, you've seen it on TV and you've seen it in the movies where they're depicting what it is like to be in solitary confinement. completely isolated from the world, with nothing to do to help pass the time. Solitary confinement is known as a punishment used in the prison system, but a recent study shows the consequences may be even greater. When researchers at Cornell University analyzed a Danish prison system, they found that spending time in solitary confinement can significantly increase the risk of death for inmates. And this is after they have been released. According to the study, 4.5% of former inmates who had spent time in solitary confinement were dead within 5 years of being released from prison. A 60% higher risk of mortality compared to former inmates who had not spent time in isolation. Researchers found that the average stay in solitary confinement was around 9 days. But about 2/3 of those involved in the study spent less than a week in isolation. And around half spent only 5 days. Regardless of the length of stay, researchers say the connection was clear. In general, the majority of solitary confinement inmates who passed away after their release were younger and had several longer prison sentences. Most of the deaths were caused by suicide, violence, and accidents. So don't think to leave out the accident factor. That plays a role too. But suicide is way up in there. While most people are not locked up in a room with nothing to do and nowhere to go, many people are still living in isolation. According to the most recent statistics, loneliness is at epidemic proportions in the United States. While loneliness can certainly take a toll on your mental health, it can also affect your physical health, as we've been talking about tonight. Studies have shown that people who are lonely are more likely to experience higher levels of perceived stress, increased inflammation, reduced immune function, and poor sleep. Feeling lonely is also a strong predictor of dementia. It is truly amazing how your mindset can influence your physical health. While overcoming loneliness is no small feat, research has proven that human beings are social creatures meant to interact with other human beings on physical and emotional levels. If you struggle with loneliness, believe me, you're not alone. For strategies to help address and overcome loneliness, do some research online, talk to someone, talk to a professional, and there is also an article read tackling the loneliness epidemic. Something that you should consider looking into, because that in and of itself would be quite interesting. And really and truly, it takes you through looking at loneliness at epidemic levels in the US, with 46% of adults saying they sometimes or always feel lonely. 46% of adults. Now, that's half the adult population, which means every other person, every other adult that you interact with living in the United States on a daily basis could be experiencing loneliness. Not necessarily that they're alone, but they're experiencing loneliness. Based on what we've been talking about tonight, that is kind of scary. According to statistics, in a 2018 Cigna Insurance Health Survey of 20,000 individuals aged 18 and over, 46% report sometimes or always feeling lonely. 47% say they feel left out. 47% say they do not have meaningful in-person social interactions or extend conversations on a daily basis. 43% sometimes or always feel the relationships they have are not meaningful. And 43% report feeling isolated. Almost every other person that you come into contact with out of 20,000, that is, above the age of 18. So, 1 in 2, 1 in 3 will probably say one or a combination of these things. The loneliest are young adults between the ages of 18 and 22. This age group also rated their health the lowest, which correlates with science linking loneliness with a greater risk for obesity, heart disease, anxiety, dementia, and reduced lifespan. In fact, maintaining strong and healthy social connections has been linked to a 50% reduced risk of early death. Similarly, emotional loneliness is linked with an increased risk of all-cause mortality. Studies have also shown that people who are lonely are more likely to experience higher levels of perceived stress, increased inflammation, reduced immune function, and, like I said before, poor sleep. And poor sleep also leads to poor health. It's just an endless cycle. Not a good cycle either to be caught in. There's a 2011 study that found that for each 1 point increase on the UCLA loneliness scale, an individual is 8% more likely to experience some sort of sleep disruption. Research has also shown that lack of sleep has the effect of triggering feelings of loneliness. So the two problems tend to feed on each other. Somewhat surprisingly, seniors over the age of 77, an age group well known for loneliness, had the lowest loneliness score in Cigna's survey. 77% also rated their physical health as good, very good, or excellent, compared to just 65% of younger generation Xers. Even the U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration, the HRSA, acknowledges that there is an epidemic of loneliness in the United States and that it is taking a mounting toll on public health. According to the Health Resources and Services Administration, the HRSA, a panel presentation by the National Institute for Healthcare Management, a non-profit research firm for the health insurance industry, revealed social isolation among seniors is costing the federal government $6.7 billion each year in added healthcare spending, as poor social relationships are associated with a 29% higher risk of heart disease and 32% increased risk of stroke. Now let's take this information into consideration as it relates to incarceration. You would think then that conditions would be in their best interest to improve conditions as it relates to incarceration. You would think that the whole concept of solitary confinement in incarceration would be reduced significantly. Because one of the things that we are coming to realize more and more is that the correctional facility system needs correction in and of itself. And what the correctional system in the United States provides is not the reduction of crime. It's an increase in business, but it is not a reduction in crime. So, when you take things like this here, as it relates to loneliness and isolation and the relation to health, and you apply that to a prison system, you see a large number of unhealthy individuals. And this is that other side of the business of the prison system that is probably often overlooked. Who was it? Eric last night mentioned the business of the prison system, looking at juvenile incarceration. He was mentioning that the whole prison system is a business. Look at this side of the business. If there's one thing that we're pretty much guaranteed to have in the United States, is a thriving pharmaceutical business. Because there is a pill for everything and a vaccination being created for every other thing. None of which comes free or cheap. So it is big business. If the prison system is generating individuals who are not healthy, they may go in healthy, but they're coming out unhealthy. And they're providing, the pharmaceutical industry is providing a drug to help combat whatever dis-ease you're experiencing. That is a business, because they are providing a solution that is needed for a problem. Albeit, they're probably funding the problem, the creation of the problem in and of itself, but that's a matter of opinion and maybe for another show. But doesn't it stand to make sense? Don't the dots naturally connect? I could be wrong. But based on what we're learning, based on what we're seeing, based on what the stories that we're hearing from the individuals who are living it, it only stands to reason that the business is booming. So the idea of isolation creating a health problem, especially as it relates to incarceration, that is a business strategy. And if it is not a business strategy, it is capitalizing on what is there as a result of the business of incarceration. Far too often, again, we overlook these things. We overlook the fact that there's a possibility that this is all happening because of the business. We overlook the possibility that it is happening because of the possibility of an experiment. You're in prison, you have lost basically all your rights. And you're at the will of those in power. If there is a new drug to be tested in the name of general health, that drug could possibly be administered to someone in prison. And then that individual or those individuals are studied. Sounds far-fetched? Well, think about it. And maybe, just maybe, it won't seem as far-fetched afterwards. But again, these are the issues that we face in our daily lives. And as it relates to the idea of loneliness and isolation, whether it is from aging, whether it is from being in a nursing home, whether it is from moving to a new location, whatever it is that creates that feeling of loneliness, understand that it comes with the possibility of dis-ease. It is amplified when you take into consideration incarceration. Yes, you may be in prison and in general population. You're still in prison, away from the community as you know it. This can create loneliness. And take it a step further, while in prison, depending on the type of sentence that you have, you could be in prison alone. Because you could be confined to solitary confinement. That is creating a problem. Psychologically, physiologically. Either way, your health is on the decline if you are facing this situation. But never fear, there may be a drug for that. Watch out for the side effects though, because you're going to need drugs for that. Just things to consider as we go through our daily routines. You know, when you meet someone along the way, when you actually stop to talk to someone, just take 5 minutes and listen. Really listen to that individual as you communicate with them. It may actually be that one thing that changes their entire world. You know, it is said one person may not be able to change the world with their actions, but one person's actions might change the world for one person. You be that person who would change the world positively because your action would mean the world to someone, but in a positive way. And see how much change you've created in that little section of your community. And that person, feeling so good, goes on to do it for another person. And the possibility of that creating a ripple effect. You see a healthier society forming. That's what I see. But, you know, I could just be hopeful. Or I might be right.
So the more things change, the more them remain the same. Yeah. Even though it rains today, yet come tomorrow, it all just drains away. All fades away.
This is the sound of Ed Robinson.
You might fill with pain, but come tomorrow, the joy returns again.
The track is called Don't Forget to Remember.
And after all the fuss and all the fight, everything they put us through, and after all the cuss and all the sus, the one thing to do is don't forget to remember, come November.
I want to say thanks to GMAT Music Solutions for sponsoring this segment of the show. This is called our musical therapy.
I'm hoping that you remember, come November, nothing on earth will change.
GMAX Music Solutions provides sound and light production services.
The lies that them tell today, come tomorrow.
They provide audio engineers, DJs, bands, musicians, singers. They bring your event to life. Give them a call, 754-307-GMAX. That's 754-307-4622. Tell them you heard about them on the night shift with DJ Kevin Stew, yeah? Taking it once more from the top, Ed Robinson.
Even though it rains today, yet come to.
Don't forget to remember.
It all just drains away. All fades away. Today might fill with pain, but come tomorrow, the joy returns again. The joy returns again. And after all the fuss and all the fight, everything they put us through, and after all the cuss and all the sus, the one thing to do is don't forget to remember, come November, their world remain the same. Nothing will change. I'm hoping that you remember, come November, nothing on earth will change. Nothing ever changed, no. The lies that them tell today, come tomorrow, they'll tell them lies again. Same lies, oh yeah. The system that's in place to keep us in our place will never change. No. Cause after all the fight, they'll take your rights, and we know it's true. And after all the talk, we march and walk, the one thing to do is don't forget to remember, come November, their world remain the same. Nothing ever changed, no. I'm hoping that you remember, come November, it's still the same. Nothing on earth will change. Nothing ever changed, no. Round and round and round, this old world still goes around. Round and round and round, but sooner or later they'll feed the ground. Round and round and round, when will my people start to learn? What goes up comes down. Who start the fire will get burned. Don't forget to remember, come November, their world remain the same. The more things changes, the more they remain the same. Yeah, I'm hoping that you remember, come November, please remember, nothing on earth. change. I change, no. Don't forget to remember, come November, there will remain the same. The world will always remain the same. Hoping that you remember, come November.
Must live good. So come now, hear this. I hope if I could live and sing,
This is new music from Flower Gun.
I live good in the community.
Track is called Live Good.
Some say Flower Gun, it's hard to do. Watch this. Just pray unto Jah and everything will come true. Choo, 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 choo. Lord say live good. You come from Jamaica, me I beg you live good. You come from New York, me I beg you live good. You come from London, me I beg you live good. Say peace and love in the neighborhood. Ninja man ball out, girl turn good. But Flower gonna tell all them massive live good. No lick shot like you, that down a Hollywood. No busy that you're black and me no busy that you're white. Say listen Flower gonna me I jump up on the mic. Me want every man just to unite and do all the things. You know that you're right. Say you know, say we are Israelite, light. Come, I hope if I could live to sing, yeah. Come on, everyone live good in this country, yeah. Follow me, but me said this one dedicated to boys and girls. Follow me, what? We have to live good for this around on the world. Say you me my sisters and all my brothers. By the same father, forget the M16, the Bushmaster. Let's live in peace and in good order. Now ring up your face like you are warmonger. Remember if you smile, you look much better. Say listen Flower Gun, the rubber dog teacher. We run dance all in every corner, and everywhere they go them ball for the teacher. Cha. So follow me now, Lord. I hope if I could live and see. Every man live good in the community. Some say Flower Gun, it's hard to do. But watch this. Just pray unto Jah and everything will come true. Lord say live good. You come from Jamaica, me I beg you live good. You come from jungle, me I beg you live good. You come from Rima, me I beg you live good. Say peace and love in the neighborhood. Ninja man ball out, girl turn good. But Flower gonna tell all them as live good. No lick shot like you, that down a Hollywood. No busy get your black and me no busy get your white.
She called me on the phone, asking would I be coming home. She's feeling all alone. Is that felt free? What slave could I be? She needs a company. Her body's golden me. But I was lying and
This is the sound of Kirk Davis, something known as Little Kirk. It's called That's the Way Love Goes.
Cheating and she's hurt. It's getting on.
15 minutes to the top of the hour, 15 minutes before I get out of here. I want to remind you to join me tomorrow night. Real Talk Wednesday, closing out the night shift week. I have a very special show where we speak to someone who is currently incarcerated. As he comes and tells his story. You know, we get to see some of what we've been talking about over the past week and longer, actually. We get to see some of it, figuratively speaking, directly being presented tomorrow night, courtesy of our guest. Stay tuned for that one.
Tell them fi no trouble me now. Alright, tell them fi no trouble me now. Alright.
For all the Hezites, this is Hezron.
Oh Lord.
The track is called One Time Gone.
It's hard to be humble. Tell them fi no trouble me now. Crosses people. Oh Lord. Want see how me rumble. Hey, look, me put down me old gangster ways. Take up the Bible, put down the hard ways. Call from Rasta and pagan ways. Out of nowhere, this boy misbehave. See me and me woman and a passing place. Lord of mercy, come take this case. Every time you come now, leave in a haze. So what you did there before me change my name. As if I did one time go. Pretty at all. He wanna be so pretty at all. Lord of mercy, one time girl. He wanna be so pretty at all. He wanna be so pretty at all. Tell them to leave her alone. Tell them to trouble me now. Tell them to not trouble me now. Tell them to not trouble me now. Tell them to not. Cause if I did one time go, he wouldn't be so pretty at all. He wouldn't be so pretty at all. Lord of mercy, one time go. He wouldn't be so pretty at all. He wouldn't be so pretty at all. Lord, oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. Tell them to not trouble me now. Pass his people. Want to see how me rumble. Look how you take me away from trouble, Lord, from the ways of evil now. This boy won't draw me out. Turn me back in a bad disciple. Alright, cause if I did one time girl, he wouldn't be so pretty at all. He wouldn't be so pretty at all. Lord of mercy, one time girl, he wouldn't be so pretty at all. He wouldn't be so pretty at all. Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. His people, oh no, want to see how me rumble.
I know a girl, and she puts the colors inside of my way.
sound of G. Cole.
Just like a maze, where all of the walls
His rendition
continue
of a track called Daughters.
and I've done all I can to stand on her steps with my heart in my hand. Now I'm starting to see maybe it's got nothing to do with me. Fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love you like you do. Yeah, yeah. And girls become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. Same she's been standing in since the day that she saw him walking away. Now she's alone, picking up the mess he's made. So fathers, be good to your daughters. Daughters will love you like you do. Yeah, yeah. Become lovers who turn into mothers. So mothers, be good to your daughters too. Boys who can brave, you find out how much they can take. But boys will be strong, and boys soldier on, and boys won't be gone without a home.
Never dwell too much on your sorrow. Life is a gift to us, it's not borrowed. Live in love and good days will follow.
This is Maurice Gregory.
Believe me, I know how you feel.
The track is called Life.
So like the good days are gone, it never comes.
Maurice is a member of Third World. Grammy-winning, international award-winning Third World.
That is the only way we can survive. You live one more day, you can fight. Your heart breaks when comes disappointment. And you're shadowed by the fear, then comes the haunting. But there's more to life than just the bad things. There's so much good in us, now let your stars start shining. But believe me, I know how you're feeling. It's like the good days are gone, it never comes. That is the meaning of life. Love is the secret to life. That is the only way you can fight.
Whoa, well now.
This is how we close out tonight. The sound of Ed Robinson. New music from him. This one is called More We Are Together.
They say it takes love to make the world go round.
Remember to join me tomorrow as I talk to James Ellis.
Takes hate to make it all tumble down. We know that.
Speaking to him out on
don't always
Ohio Correctional Facility.
But when it goes around, we know it's have to come back around. So if you're digging one pit, my brother,
in the meantime,
just dig two. And if you're setting one trap,
I get to call it a night for this Healthy Love edition.
You know things are wrong.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day to you wherever you are in the world.
Reality could sometimes be your
From right here in South Florida, good night.
We are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together, the stronger we shall be. Yes, the more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together, the stronger we shall be. Instead of building walls, let's build bridges instead. Instead of fighting wars, let peace go ahead. Remember, today is for you, but tomorrow's for me. The light has been shining for you. Don't be so blind to see. Things are always never what they seem. No, my reality could sometimes be your dream. The more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together, the stronger we shall be. Yes, the more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together, the stronger we shall be. This is a warning. Whatever goes around will come back around. This is a warning. Don't let your walls come tumbling down. This is a warning. 7 times rise and 7 times fall. This is a warning. Rise up your mind, let it stand up tall. Yes, the more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together, the stronger we shall be. Yes, the more we are together, the happier we shall be. The more we stand together.
When being in the moment is priceless, consider the ability to share that moment. If you can video it, you can broadcast it. And Pulse E-Media Group has the tools you need. Weddings, birthdays, funerals, graduations, church services, parties, seminars, you name it. Pulse E-Media Group can provide you with a secure medium controlled by you to broadcast your event. Contact us at www.pulsemediagroup.com for more information. Pulse E-Media Group, when being in the moment is priceless.